All right, we're back. Okay. It's done. Now the video is recording. Okay. So, so this is for two-phase locking. So the idea here, the problem with the locking-based techniques is that you can have deadlocks. What do I mean by deadlocks? Deadlocks is a very simple term. Deadlocks means that one transaction is waiting for an item, a data item, that is locked by another transaction. And the other transaction is waiting for the original transaction to also unlock another data item. So what does that mean? It's like they're both waiting on each other, and this way they will never end. So it's like an infinite loop in a program you write. So that's what we mean by deadlock. So how can we solve this? This is definitely a problem, okay? And two-phase locking can lead to deadlocks. So how can we fix it? Any ideas? Please.
Check for deadlocks before. If we have a request for all the resources, so we can check if there might be a deadlock in case we provide a shared log or an exclusive log.
But how can you figure out if there's a lock or not? Technically, how? Please.
By drawing a directed acyclic graph between the resources acquired by transaction 1 and transaction 2. If there is a loop, then follow it.
Exactly. So you two actually presented two main techniques. One mechanism is to prevent deadlocks, right? But this requires a lot of pre-processing, right? Which also might be a bottleneck for the database system. But there are techniques to prevent deadlocks. And the other technique is let the system run, let this locking mechanism does what it has to do, and then have a mechanism to detect where a deadlock happens. How can we detect? So the gentleman in the back mentioned that we create a graph of transactions. Remember we talked about the dependency graph last time? This is different, okay? So it is a graph also of transactions, but the logic of the connections between the transaction is different. So the graph that we build, let's call it waits for graph. It's called waits for because an edge between a transaction and another transaction means that this transaction is waiting for the other transaction to release the lock. Okay? So transaction Ti, transaction Tj, there is an edge between both of them. If Ti is waiting for Tj to release a lock on an item because it needs it. Okay? And vice versa. And you can definitely presume or you can guess that when there is a deadlock, when there is a cycle in this graph, that means there is a deadlock. And if you have two transactions, it's simple because this one is really waiting for this to release a lock and the other one is waiting for the other transaction to release a lock. But if you have a bigger, like more than one transaction, the cycle doesn't need to be direct. It can't be like this. Like you have T1, T2, T3, T4, right? This is the graph. It can be like this. So this cycle is also an indication that there is a deadlock in the system. Make sense? Let's just go through this long chain. And this is the wait for graph for some transactions running. So let's take a quick exercise of how deadlocks work. So you have T1, you have T2. These are transactions, T3 and T4. And each transaction is reading or writing some items in the database. So this is transaction 1, it's reading A, and then acquiring a shared log on B. And then transaction 2 is basically doing this and writing into B. And then transaction 3, shared log on C, and then reading C. Okay. And then transaction 2 by the end here is requiring an exclusive lock on C. Okay. And then transaction 4, it's acquiring a exclusive lock on B here. So again, this is a time span, so the timeline of the transactions. So this is a little bit misleading, so I'll just get it out. So based on this, I want you guys to let me know how can I draw the weights for a graph here. So T1, and you have T2, you have T3, you have T4. So what is the weight for graph in this case? Anyone? It's easy, right? Is there, let me ask you a question. Is there any edge between T1 and T2?
Yes.
So is T1 waiting for T2?
Yeah.
Okay, so this means, right? What is it waiting for? T1, T2, explain. So there is an exclusive lock on B here. So this is why, and T1 wants to a shared lock on B. So it has to wait. There's no other option. So this is a conflicting operation, so it has to wait. So this is why we draw an edge here. So what about an edge between T2 and T3?
Yes.
Why? So T2 wants to read, want an exclusive lock on C. So it's waiting for T3 to release the shared lock, right? So we have, who's waiting for whom? So the edge will be T3 to T2, right? I'm a little confused. Where's the edge? Okay, so what about the rest of the nodes? 2 to 3. So what about T4? So T4, is there any edge between T4 and any other transaction? T4 and T2, right? Why is that? Because T4 is waiting for T2 to release the exclusive lock on B. So T4 and T2 that way. So is there any deadlock here? Is there any deadlock here? I don't hear everyone. Is there any deadlock here? No. Good. All right. What if we came in T3? Okay. It's T3. T2. Okay. And we did this. So what does that mean? So, sorry, wait a minute. I don't know where the lines, I don't know how to write, but it's fine. Yeah. So if we done that, what does that mean? If we added share exclusive lock in T3 on A, Can T3 take that lock? Why? T1 is already has a shared block boundary. So what does this mean in the graph? What does it mean? Is there any deadlock here? Right? There's a cycle here. So this easily tells you when there is a deadlock. So the system, if it keeps track of this wait for graph, it can know now, oh yes, now there's a deadlock. So in this case, what shall we do if there's a deadlock? Any ideas?
Kill one process.
What's that?
We can kill one transaction.
Kill one of them, exactly. So, and restart it later, right? So you go into the deadlock, you go into this vicious cycle, right? And decide to kill one of these transactions and then restart it later. So which transaction to kill?
The one that will start.
Probably one which is taking more time, or probably even the one taking more resources. Depends.
What about the one that didn't spend so much time doing anything anyway? The younger transaction. Because I'm not going to waste a lot of because again, if you've done a lot of operations in transaction and then you decide to kill the transaction, it's a waste because you process these operations. But if the transaction has done just maybe one operation or something, what about killing that one? It could be okay. I'm not saying your strategy is wrong. I'm saying there's also another option. Please.
Can we maintain a priority queue of all the transactions and then kill the least priority?
The priority based on what? On timestamp or based on what?
Yeah, depending, like there can be multiple factors like timestamp or like memory used or something like that.
Yeah. Of course. So that this is how you want to implement it, right? Yes. Okay, that's one way to implement it. Please.
The transaction which has the maximum number of inward arrows.
The transaction which has the maximum number of
Inward edges.
maximum number of inward edges. Why?
Is other transactions are dependent on it. The transaction on which almost everyone is dependent. If we kill that one, then we provide more resources.
This is a good point, but who said that this is because everyone is relying on it? That killing it, yes, it will solve if it's in the cycle, it will solve the deadlock. But what matters the most is to breaking the cycle. Which transaction, it doesn't matter if, so you can have, one transaction, a lot of people waiting on, like T4. But there's no cycle at all. This is fine.
In the cycle, the one in the cycle.
The one in the cycle, yes, you can do that. So if most people, a lot of things relying on, but I will say that it might give you a better performance, but what matters the most is not to waste any work that you've done, because this transaction that everybody's relying on, maybe you have already done like 1 million operations in it. And if you kill the transaction, you might lose a lot. So, yes, it could be. So this is why there's no one answer to this question. The system adaptively decide which transaction to kill. Usually, because that's mostly the case, people will kill the youngest transaction. Because it makes more sense to not, because there's not much that has been done. And you can afford, you have the luxury to restart that transaction. All right, so far, we talked about what? We talked about transaction processing and we talked about transaction processing in centralized systems. So this is just to remind you how that works. So what about in a distributed system? Do you think how much will this differ in a distributed database system? It's pretty much the same, right? So you have, we talked about the modules that help the database system run a transaction or perform concurrency control. We have transaction manager. We have scheduler to decide what the schedule transaction is. We have a block manager, right? So we have all these modules. So the idea here, which of these modules can be distributed? That is the question. And when it's distributed, what are the challenges that comes with any of these modules being distributed across the cluster or across the distributed sites? That is the question we want to answer. So usually, you have mainly three players when it comes to distributed database system, when we're talking about transaction manager. First off, you have the sites where the data is. And each of these sites have their own execution engine that processes the data. And processing data means reading or writing the data, okay? So you have participant sites or data processor. Data processor. This is participating site. What I mean by participating here, it's a site, we have so many sites, but only a subset of them participates in a transaction because these are the sites that have the data needed by this transaction. So participating site. Okay, so this is one player in this transaction management. And you have the transaction manager. It's different than the data processor. The data processor is responsible for reading, writing the data, processing the data. Transaction manager is responsible for coordinating the transaction. Okay, all the logic we talked about, like two-phase locking and like the coordinating the transaction management, this is taken care of by the transaction manager. So you'll have a coordinating transaction manager. TM will mean transaction managers. Okay? And you will have also something called the lock manager. The lock manager basically does the locking, takes care, keeps track of all the locks, and it it grants or takes the locks or releases the locks and everything from the items. Right? So again, these are distributed. You have multiple data processors. The coordinating transaction manager is centralized. Let's assume that this is the site. The transaction manager, coordinating transaction manager, runs at the site where the transaction originated from. So this site receives the transaction, it originated in this, so you'll have a coordinating transaction manager running there. And the lock manager, let's assume it's centralized, which means you have also one site that you keep track of all the locks. In that case, how can the transaction management work? What do you guys think? So we said the transaction originated at transaction manager, right? So this is one site. So this site will, okay, transaction originated here. Let's assume that as the transaction proceeds, there is some data that needs to be read or written, and you need to acquire or obtain a lock. So whom are you going to ask for the lock? This lock manager. So basically, it starts that way. So this is a lock request. So you send a request to the lock manager, which is centralized in this case. And the lock manager, let's assume, found out that there's no problem. I can, based on the table that I have, this lock can be granted. So what it's going to do? grant the lock. So the transaction manager now, transaction management now knows that, yes, this data item, the lock is granted. What it's going to do then? It has to perform the operation, right? So it will send a signal to the corresponding data processor, right? And ask to perform the operation. The operation could be a read or write on the data, right? Do the operation. So it will ask the data processor to process the operation. And then once the operation is processed, what's going to happen? What? How are we going to? So you mean the data processor will send? This is two-phase locking. Two-phase locking. What do I mean by two-phase locking? Strict two-phase locking, actually. So I'm not releasing locks now, right? So what do I need to do?
It tells the coordinator
That's
the task end.
the task ended. So done, right? So that's the operation is done. At the end of operations, I'm done with it. Now what's going to happen? You keep doing that. So if you go to the coordinator again, you ask for log request for another data item, you grant the log, you go do the operation on the participating, maybe a different data site, okay, and go back and forth that way. So the operations are being processed on distributed sites, different data processed on different sites, but the coordinating transaction manager is just one location, and the log manager is centralized. After you do all of this, you go to the second phase of two-phase locking, and you are at the transaction. You are at the coordinating transaction manager. You send a signal to this guy, the lock manager, and say, after you finish, release locks. Right? Does it make sense? Isn't this like easy to follow, right? Okay, question for you guys. Okay, we did two-phase locking in a distributed system, right? We have different read and write operations running in a distributed manner, right? So what is the problem with this approach? If there is a problem, what are the issues? What do you think? Please.
What if two requests come at the same time?
Explain.
I mean, if there are two incoming requests for the log manager for the same resource, then how is the log manager going to resolve that?
The coordinating transaction manager is responsible for the requests, and it sends one request at a time. This is why this is a coordinating transaction manager.
But it will be serving a request of certain data processors, data processing different nodes. So what if two nodes are sending requests for the coordinating manager at the same time?
The lock manager has a holistic view of the whole locks in the system, everywhere. So it knows whether any data item in any data processor, any site, whether it's locked or not, what kind of lock is acquired on it. It's centralized, knows everything. What is the problem with that, if there's a problem? Please.
The transaction manager is actually only on one side, so to get the signals from different sides, we need network operations, and network operations are slow, so that would affect the database processing.
So, again, so you mean the transaction manager will send to how many?
So to talk to different sites, it uses network operations, and network operations are very slow, sometimes even unreliable, so that would affect the speed at which the transactions are.
Exactly. So here you have one transaction manager, and having this one transaction manager that talks to all data sites and also serves as a mediator between the data sites and the lock manager is actually a huge burden on the system. Okay? So it's not only coordinating the transaction, it also serves as a mediator between the data processors and the lock manager. It was okay in a centralized system because the data processors are actually in the same system as the transaction manager, so it's not a mediator, it's actually the same thing, right? But in this case, it's not. So this bottleneck, as you can see, a lot of messages going back and forth, while you could have just, instead of doing this, you could have just, it could be only one message, right? And you fix things. So what we have seen, this is called centralized two-phase locking in a distributed database. So it's not the typical two-phase locking we've seen. It's called centralized because the lock manager is central. And it only talks to the transaction manager. This is why it's called centralized. Another technique is called the distributed two-phase locking. And the distributed two-phase locking, the only difference is that you still have a coordinating transaction manager, fine, and you have distributed lock managers. So one transaction manager, okay, for a specific transaction, but for each site data processor, okay, you have a lock manager for this site. So in this case, what happens? So you have coordinating transaction manager. So coordinating TM in here, and you have a participating lock manager. Lock manager, as opposed to the centralized lock manager we had last time. And you have a participating data processor or site. So, participating data processor. So in this case, the transaction originates at the coordinating transaction manager, again. And then you want to read or write an item. There is a lock request. What are you going to do with the lock request? What is it? Send it to the participating lock manager, right? So lock request. In this case, the lock manager, the participating lock manager doesn't need to go back and grant the lock, send this grant lock message to the coordinating transaction manager. It can do that directly and ask the data processor to do the operation. Right? And the data processor, when the operation ends, what's it going to do? It doesn't need to go to the lock manager. We're still getting the locks. It's two-phase locking, okay? So we're not releasing any locks yet. So all what happens here is that it has to go all the way and say end of operation. And you keep doing that for all operations, for all locks, for all operations, till you reach an end. Okay, so you keep doing this, and by the end, what do? Release the locks. You know how to release the locks because you're the one who requested the lock anyway, right? So you release locks. And this is called distributed two-phase locking. You guys understand the difference? Do you understand the benefit of this over the centralized two-phase locking? So what is the problem with it, if there's any problem? Centralized two-phase locking, please.
Coordinating TM is still centralized, so still it is a permission there.
It is still centralized, but I mean, it's necessary so that you can keep track of what's going on, right? Please.
How to keep track of deadlocks if in case there are multiple locks?
A good point. We're going to talk about that, but not now. In a distributed system. Yes, you're right. But this is not only in this algorithm, even if you have a distributed system, so how can you keep track of deadlocks? We're going to talk about that. Good point. So, the problem here, generally with locking algorithms, is that the lock manager, whether it's centralized or distributed, it can, first of all, it can lead to deadlocks, as you mentioned, right? And second of all, it can affect the system performance, two-phase locking specifically, because of these rigid two phases. Okay, so it can actually affect the system performance. You can, what I mean by system performance here, I'm talking about the throughput of the system. So this is why there are other techniques besides locks. So what we discussed so far are locking-based mechanisms. But there are other mechanisms called, for example, timestamp ordering mechanism. So instead of the database system keeping track of locks like that way, and you have a lock manager, and you have a shared lock, exclusive lock, each transaction comes with a timestamp. And each operation in the transaction also comes with a timestamp. The assumption is that this timestamp is unique per transaction and per operation in the transaction, and monotonic. What do I mean by monotonic? It increases, right? Monotonically increasing over time. So it's unique and monotonically increasing over time. So that is the assumption for the timestamp. So given a timestamp, how can we do the transactions concurrently, and how can we do all of that without locks? Without these kind of logical locks. This is, let's see an example. So assume you have two operations coming from two different transactions. So one operation is called OIJ, and the other operation is called OKL. Just to focus a little bit. So the I and the K, first letter in each of one of them, is actually the ID of the transaction. So this operation belongs to a transaction called TI, and this operation belongs to a transaction called TK. So the idea here is that you don't have locks, but you need to decide which operation to do first. So the rule in timestamp ordering, the very basic timestamp ordering algorithm, this is called timestamp ordering, TO, is that this operation, OIJ, is performed before OKL only if the timestamp of TI is less than the timestamp of TK. So OIJ is before TL if the timestamp of TI is less than the timestamp of TK. What does it mean? Like, from an application perspective.
It came earlier.
Yes, it came earlier. Who? Like which transaction?
Operation IG.
No, I'm talking about timestamp of transaction. So TI is the older transaction. So TI is the older and TK is the younger transaction. Okay, so this is obvious. This is the older, this is the younger, right? So this condition will help you not having any conflicts. So whenever you have an operation, again, whenever you have an operation and you want to decide whether this operation will run or not, the idea here is to run the operation if it's the transaction running this operation is younger than all the other transactions in the system. What if it's not younger? What you're going to do with the transaction? You're going to restart the transaction limit. So whenever you have an operation, if the transaction, each operation belongs to a transaction, and each transaction has a lot of operations. But whenever an operation comes into the system, because like again, this is a time span. So whenever an operation comes to the system, if the timestamp of the transaction is younger than other transactions, you run the operation. If it's not, you don't run the operation and you restart the transaction actually. Okay, so this comparison with all the other transactions is not very practical. So in practice, you don't want to keep track of all of this. You just want to take a decision based on just a few parameters that you have in the system. So this is why we're going to, this rule, we're going to define something for it. And to make it easier for the system to detect or to decide, take a decision what to do with the operation and the transaction. So each data item, so let's assume data item X, it will have two timestamps. So one timestamp is called the read timestamp of this transaction, and the other one is called the write timestamp. Okay? So data item, so that's RTS. This is the read timestamp of item X. TS, this is the write timestamp of item X. And each one of them means, when I say the read timestamp of data item X, I mean it's the timestamp of the largest timestamp of a transaction that accessed X, that has read X. The same for the write timestamp. It is the largest timestamp of a transaction that has written something to X. This is what it means. Are you guys following, or are we losing track here? Okay, so given these two values, whenever I have an operation that wants to read X, now I'm having an operation coming to the system for a transaction called TI, right? And it wants to read X. What decision should I take if I want to read X? What do you guys think? So again, an X is for transaction I. The read timestamp of X is the timestamp of the largest timestamp of the transaction that has read X. And write timestamp is the same, but for writing, not reading. So whenever you have a read, so when shall you accept the operation and process it? And when shall you reject the operation and then restart the transaction? TI again. What are the conditions? Please.
If the timestamp of transaction TI is greater than the timestamp of RT is X.
So a conflicting operation, when you're reading X, what is a conflicting operation? If somebody has written X before, right? So you want to make sure, what do you want to make sure of? If there is no younger transaction, there is no younger transaction that has written anything to X. This is the condition you want to make sure of. Younger than TI. You understand why is this? So here you're reading X. You want just to make sure that there is no younger transaction than TI that has written anything to X. Because if there is a younger transaction than TI that has written any value to X, this will lead to conflict. Making sense, right? So the condition here is that you want to make sure that the timestamp of TI is
greater than double S. Bigger than double S.
no. I mean, it's you want to make sure to accept it. It has to be greater than WTS, but to reject it, it will be less, right? So if it's less than WTS of X, reject. And what do you mean by reject? This is going to reject the operation and actually restart the transaction. So it's not just going to reject this operation, because if you reject this operation, then it has consequences for the transaction. All right? Otherwise, accept the read operation, you're safe. What about write? If you have a write operation on X instead of a read, what is the conflicting operation with the write? It's both read and write, right? So any conflicting operation is both read and write. So in this case, what do I want to make sure of? I want to make sure that no younger transaction has either read X or written anything into X. If there is a younger transaction that has access X rated or written into something into it, you reject the operation. And this is satisfied by the condition TS of TI less than RTS of X, and the same TS of TI is less than WTS of X. In this case, reject. Is it or and? Or and? All right, otherwise you accept the operation. So timestamp ordering. So this is basically the idea behind timestamp ordering. So what do you do? What is the problem with timestamp ordering? What do you guys think? I want to have a discussion with you if there's any problem. So far we didn't use any locks. We used just the timestamp to decide whether to take an operation or not take it and then restart the transaction, do whatever. So what is the issue with?
You need to communicate because the timestamp will be transferred from the other from network, so there will be some latency. Because it may take 10 milliseconds to transfer the data from the other server to this server.
Yes, assume it's you don't have an issue with the distributed system at all, right? Assume this is centralized. What is the issue? Anyone?
Might have to restart a transaction again and again.
you have to transact, and this issue will be amplified when you have a lot of conflicts, right? So this means that a lot of transactions will be restarted. And the reason behind that is that the system or the transaction manager takes a decision for every single operation as it comes to the system right away. This is what it does. For every, we've seen like for read or write, whenever an operation is received, it has to take an immediate decision whether to run it or restart. So this rush, if you have a lot of conflicts, will lead to a lot of restarts, and a lot of restarts will affect the system performance terribly. And you might actually lose the idea that you lose the benefit of concurrency. If you have a lot of conflicts, restarting a lot of transactions, you lose the benefit of concurrency. It would have been really better actually to do this serially. So the idea here is that you taking the decision immediately, even though it achieves conflict serializability, but it may not help the system performance in case you have a lot of conflicts. So how can we solve that problem? Just ideas. Any idea? Please.
Instead of restarting, maybe just pause.
But how you can wait? Yeah, I mean, keep going. Don't.
Instead of just like maybe sleep for a little bit on that transaction.
Makes sense. So instead of taking a decision on one action, you just collect a set of actions and take a decision according to that. Or take deal with the transaction actions when you have some sort of certainty that there will never be a restart. Okay? So, but waiting also has its disadvantages. How much you're going to wait? Sometimes an immediate decision can help you to proceed. If you wait, this means you don't do anything, right? But it is a solution to whatever we do. So we call this exact technique, this is actually, by the way, a technique that people are using. It's called conservative timestamp ordering, conservative TO. It is conservative because it does not just, whenever it has an action, it takes it, or take a decision. No, it says, I'm suspicious, maybe I will wait a little bit. Look, I will put all the operations in a queue, okay? And I will only restart the take a decision on whether to restart or accept these actions when I'm kind of certain that this transaction will not restart. Some kind of certainty. So calculating this certainty, that is a problem because you don't have like a magic formula that can give you that. But there are some techniques that people invented to predict whether a transaction will restart or not, and conservative timestamp ordering sometimes use these techniques. Let me ask you a question. What if we go too conservative? What's going to happen? What we're going to end up doing if we go too conservative. Conservative, again, as he mentioned here, is that we wait. We get an action, we don't take a decision, we wait. Get another action, don't take a decision, wait. If we went very conservative, what's going to happen? Extreme conservatism. What is it? No. What kind of schedule will end up having, theoretically? Please. You said something here. Serial schedule, right? So if we went extremely conservative, and you will end up in a serial schedule. And ending up in a serial schedule means you have no concurrency whatsoever. Okay? So being conservative can be good, but being extremely conservative will not help. Okay? So no political Montesquieu or anything like that. So you can do whatever you want to do in life, right? Yeah. So by that I conclude it, and I'll see you on Wednesday. Thank you so much. Start working on the project.